Welcome to Cartoon Creators, where we talk to the minds behind the shows that raised us. I'm your host, Tamar Lilienthal, and today we're talking to Andy Yerkes. Andy is known for being the head writer on Bear in the Big Blue House, as well as developing Pocoyo and being the first head writer of the series. In this episode, we chat about his long career in children's media, all the ways in which Pocoyo was novel for kids' TV, and how Bear in the Big Blue House became a multimedia phenomenon. Let's get to the episode. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us today. Just super excited to have you here. Super excited to get into, some of the awesome shows that you've worked on. But I guess my first question that I've asked, I think all of our guests so far, is, everyone's got a story of how they ended up in the kids media world. So, what's yours? How'd you get here?
Wow. Well, I went to NYU actually in the fiction writing program, and I met a lot of people in the playwriting and screenwriting programs, and I got involved with a theater company that still exists actually called Naked Angels. It used to be on 17th Street. Now they're just sort of a producing company, but we used to sort of hang out in a space on 17th Street and make theater. And I did a lot of stuff with them. And I had several short plays. And people from Jumbo Pictures actually, Kim Chandler was the girlfriend of an actor named Severio Guerra, who and is now for many years been his wife. And she worked for Jumbo Pictures. Severio is now an actor. He was Mocha Joe on Curb Your Enthusiasm. And so the Kim saw a play, some stuff that I had written, one of which he was in, and worked for Jumbo Pictures. I don't know if you remember Jumbo Pictures. They were, at that point, most sort of known for Doug.
Yeah.
Show. Yeah. And she recommended that they ask me to come in and sort of do some writing for them. And I was, for a while, at first, I did a bunch of development, sort of created some shows, none of which really ever went anywhere. But I did also write on Doug, and my writing partner at the time was Ken Lonergan. I don't know if you. He's now an Oscar-winning writer and director. Yeah, he wrote and directed a movie called Manchester by the Sea, which won him an Oscar several years ago for Best Original Screenplay, and won Casey Affleck the Best Actor Oscar. And it's a very it's a great movie. He's a really terrific writer. Anyway, I wrote some stuff with him. We wrote episodes of Doug together. I sort of started writing stuff more on my own. They hired me on a show called Allegra's Window.
Yeah.
And I worked on that alone, but I was also had another writing partner, Pippin Parker, and we wrote together on a show called The Tick. And I eventually was on the staff for Allegra's Window. It was a puppet show, as you probably remember.
Yeah.
And then I got sort of called into Mitchell Kriegman had a sort of a general development deal at Jim Henson, and I got called in along with 5 or 6 other people to write what they called a test pilot for Bear in the Big Blue House, when Bear was still, puppets were not final, Bear was still being built, and we all sort of drew names out of a hat essentially for the themes that we would get, and I got there last, and I got the Gravity episode.
All right.
Basically, this was a kind of a scheme to write 5 pilots. They were called test pilots, which is a way of getting out of having one person write a pilot and having to pay television pilot rates. So we all sort of wrote a version of the show.
Right.
And mine was the one that Mitchell liked the best.
Wow.
Yeah. And I he offered me the job as head writer, which was the first head writer job I'd ever had. And so I then came in and worked for several months at the old townhouse on 69th Street, the Henson Townhouse, which I don't think they own it anymore, but it was like this sort of, this sort of center of the Jim Henson world. And worked in an office there, coming up with stories and sort of helping to, kind of form the sort of format for Bear. I had this, one of the things that I contributed was this sort of, I built several sort of story models for Bear. I called them Bear Stacking BBs and Bearus Interruptus, which was like, Bear's trying to do something, a specific thing, and he's wandering around the house trying to complete some task, and the kids keep interrupting him.
Right.
Until, and it's all interruptions based, the thing that he's trying to do is related to the theme, and and the kids all interrupt him with things that are related to the theme. And the first episode that was done with, I sort of, was the gravity episode, which I, was like, well, Bear wants to, the otters want to play catch with Bear. So Bear's looking for the ball and the gloves to play catch. And he's wandering around the house. And then obviously playing a game of catch is related to gravity.
Right.
And then every room that he's looking for the ball and the gloves, some other gravity related thing is going on. And it was like, my feeling at the time was like, well, this show's going to be unwatchable if there's not something that draws you through, some even just small thing that takes you from one end, like in the home episode, which was the first one to air, which I also wrote. It was just, hey, this is my home. Let's give you a tour of the house. And then you sort of, in the living room, Ojo's building a house out of pillows,
I'm getting this crazy flashback as you describe this of like, oh my goodness, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, and gosh, that was like 1996.
Wow.
Yeah. So many, many years ago. And then, I sort of just continued on and was a head writer and worked on many, many other shows.
And maybe I'm getting my years wrong here, but did any of your work, I mean, I likely am, but did any of your work on Bear in the Big Blue House overlap with Pocoyo?
No, Bear in the Big Blue House. Bear in the Big Blue House ended. We shot the last season of Bear at the end of 2001 and into 2002. It ran. They sort of split up that final season, and it ran. They sort of dragged it out a little bit on the Disney Channel. One of the reasons I remember that is because I lived in Tribeca during 9/11. I was married at the time and had a 9-month-old baby daughter. And after 9/11, we came back to our apartment, and then we started shooting the final season of Bear. We did that we did that at Chelsea Piers, and I would ride my bike up the West Side Highway every day. And while we were shooting, while we were sort of, coming up with all of the final episodes of Bear and shooting Bear, we had fighter jets flying along the Hudson River.
Wow.
Right over, you know what I mean? Like constantly, we were getting buzzed by fighter jets because of, it was that close to 9/11. And then Pocoyo was 2003, maybe. But it was, Pocoyo's 2004. I think that's when the first episode arrived. So yeah, no, that it was pretty, they were kind of close to each other. Like all that stuff was around. What I was doing in between seasons of Bear was I worked on Book of Pooh, which was also Winnie the that iteration of Winnie the Pooh.
Got it.
Yeah, and I did 100 episodes of Winnie the Pooh, Book of Pooh. That overlapped there.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. But then Pocoyo was sort of directly after all.
And what was kind of the development of that like? I think it's, I also watched Pocoyo growing up, and it was always
Yeah,
so kind of different from a lot of the
yeah,
other things out there. A lot simpler, a lot slower to an extent, at
yeah.
least to my recollection. So, like, I guess I've always just been so curious, like, how maybe I'm just thinking from a 2024 mindset and kind of knowing what sells now, but like, what
Right.
was the pitch for that like? How did that sell? And kind of how did it get its personality that was so different from everything else?
Well, I mean, Pocoyo is still on the air. Pocoyo is on. I think last I heard, Pocoyo was on Cartoon Network, and they have made like a new season at some point.
Oh wow.
Um, done like I think there's been 5 seasons of Pocoyo. They've been very spread out, obviously. I exited the show after the first season, just because at the time I was head writing 2 shows at the same time when
Whew.
they were starting the second season of Pocoyo. I was head writing 2 shows at the same time for PBS, which were Word World and Mama Mirabelle's movies. Yeah, Word World was won an Emmy for best writing for children's television.
Oh wow.
I left that show after about 50 episodes because I was completely burned out, and I had kind of helped create the co-creator and develop for television for Mama Mirabelle. I focused on that, which was also nominated for an Emmy for best children's show. But that's been a long time.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's 2000, maybe 2006, 2000, around that time. But Pocoyo, I was very, very proud of Pocoyo. The thing that you're circling back to your question.
Yeah.
I came onto Pocoyo after they had, there was this Zinkia was this animation company in Madrid, in Spain, and they had been, I think, up to then mostly an advertising animation company. They'd done ads.
Huh.
They'd never done a series, but they had David Cantola and Guillermo Garcia Carci, were basically the creators of Pocoyo. Excuse me, and they had the characters basically, which is something that I sort of something that kind of fell into my lap a lot, with people
Right.
that had characters. They were, like I said, this sort of boutique animation studio in Madrid. This big British company, ITV. I'm blanking on the name of the big conglomerate, but it was ITV, and they had bought Pocoyo, and they had tried like a dozen writers to try to a dozen British writers to try to sort of figure out what Pocoyo was, what the show would be.
Right.
None of them really kind of got them what they wanted. They brought it to me, and honestly, for me, Pocoyo, when I saw the characters, I was kind of like, instantly, I was kind of like, oh, I know what this is. You know what I mean? And that's always a really good sign for me.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I know exactly what this needs to be, and I sort of thought that Pocoyo was kind of the toddler Charlie Chaplin.
Right. Wow.
So that was the first sort of idea about what the show would be, and we did a lot of things that were kind of like in that slow, very simple, kind of unadorned Pocoyo way, which, by the way, we had to fight for. The toy company that was attached was like really pressuring us to have a more complex background so that they could create play sets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, to the credit of the animators, and I mean, I felt the same way. It was like, no, this is what this sort of white, this sort of white background. It's the simplicity of a child's mind. That's the other thing that I thought about it was, a lot of what inspired Pocoyo in the beginning, at least, was this idea of, sort of having first experiences with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the sort of meta idea of a child's mind, and I always thought of the Pocoyo's friends and playmates as being his toys, um, and just sort of, figuring stuff out and the wonder and, sort of awe of childhood, especially for, very young kids. And
Yeah.
yeah, and you know, that was sort of the basis of it. But I actually, when I brought all the writers in at first to that I wanted to work on the show, I sat them down and made them watch like 3 hours of Charlie Chaplin shorts.
Wow.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, in a lot, Pocoyo shares a lot of things in common with. This is the way I thought of it as well with silent movies.
Yeah.
Um, because there's not really a lot of dialogue, and it's the narrator who sort of, brings you along and takes you through. It's, not, there's not really, I mean, Pocoyo says a few words, but nobody else speaks. Obviously, the addition of a narrator is my thing as well. We were so lucky to get Stephen Fry, a great actor, to do it.
Right.
At least, for those first couple of seasons. And yeah, I mean, that was the sort of the birth of Pocoyo, was just like that feeling of a toddler Charlie Chaplin, and the idea of, the sort of inside of a kid's head, and the idea of, first experiences. Like the first episode I wrote was the first episode that aired, which was this episode Umbrella, which was just kind of like a, goofy, comic episode of a toddler messing around with an umbrella and figuring out what an umbrella was for.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we sort of built it from there. Later, the owner of the company came back to me like years later and asked me to write a Pocoyo movie,
Oh, wow.
which I did, and it's now been lost into the archives, because while I was writing the movie, there was a sort of hostile takeover of the company,
Oh my
and he was
goodness.
he was he was ousted. So I had to basically threaten a lawsuit to get them to pay me for my final payment for the screenplay.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and there you go. The rest is history. So yeah, that's and I was very always been very proud of Pocoyo. And the animators who created those characters, like I said, David and Guillermo, were like, they were like wild geniuses.
Wow.
It was
Yeah.
like, and at the time it was like, CG was just sort of starting to happen, really. And there was so much bad sort of CG, computer generated animation on TV.
Yeah.
It didn't. You saw it didn't look good. It was like geometric. For me, Pocoyo was the first thing that I'd seen. I was like, wow, this actually really looks good.
Yeah.
You know. So it was a combination of all those things, I think, that made Pocoyo really work. And obviously there are a few things. That's definitely one of them.
Wow. Wow. No, that's an incredible sort of journey for that show. And I think it's interesting because I didn't even know about what you were saying about this movie that you wrote that then kind of fell away due to matters outside of your control.
Right.
Um, but what I did find out also before our chat today, and I didn't know how long you had been on Bear in the Big Blue House, but you said for pretty much for its entirety, right?
I was there for the whole thing. Yeah.
So, there were also, and this I didn't know before our chat, but there were also extenuating circumstances there with the passing of the actress who voiced Luna.
Lynn. Yeah. That's not actually an accurate timeline of, like I said,
Interesting.
I think Lynn died in 2003. And we had finished by then. The show was released. There was a long pause between for us, it was 4 seasons. I think that they say it's like there's like a season 5 on the internet, but we did the last. Let's see, season 1 was 26 episodes, season 2 was 39 episodes, season 3 was 26 episodes, and season 4 was 26. And they sort of broke season 4 in half and released, I think, 13 and 13, if I'm not mistaken.
Got
And
it.
and after the first half was released, and in between, before the second half was released, is when Lynn died. But she had shot and had been Luna in all of Bear.
Got it.
Yeah, she had finished the show with us.
So it wasn't. It didn't throw a curveball necessarily at your work. I think I was less aware of that timeline.
No, there was, there were other things that caused Bear to end after 4 seasons. That wasn't one of them. I think that, it contributed, I think. And also, I'm trying to remember when the actor who played Ray died. He died, I don't remember, whatever, it's been a long time. But, he was a pretty famous actor, actually. He was the Cola, not Don Cola, not the guy from 7-Up.
Oh.
He was also, he played a big role in the movie version of Annie. Yeah. So, yeah, he died too.
Wow. So.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm still friendly with a lot of the people that I worked with on, a lot of the performers I worked with on Bear, and the writers, obviously.
That's amazing. And I think it had such a kind of magical quality to it. I know that it had a tour. It had some of what I remember. I grew up in Florida, and so my family would go to Disney World pretty much annually. We had that Florida resident discount.
Yeah.
And there was that live show at what was MGM at the time that I loved. I remember my mom taking me for at least a couple years as a kid. So,
Yeah, I wrote one of those. There were 2.
Really? No way.
Yeah, I did. I wrote the second one, which was called, I think, First Time for Everything. And it was like, there was this whole thing about like this human family, and the dad's name was actually Hugh Mann, M-A-N-N. And they, like, their car broke down in Woodland Valley, and they sort of then were taken in by Bear and his friends.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there was, I wrote that. Yeah.
That's like so crazy to me.
Yeah, I know. Mitchell wrote the first one, I think, and I wrote the second one.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So what's been, I feel like somewhat intentionally, I hoped for a really sort of Pocoyo and Bear in the Big Blue House focused conversation, particularly because of the, focus of our podcast and kind of that era of kids TV and all. But you've done many things beyond those 2 shows and continue to this day. I mean, I think I saw that you have worked on a couple Thomas the Tank Engine sort of spin-offs and such, as well as a whole host of other things, some of which you mentioned. So I think we'll close out with this very excruciatingly difficult question, but what has been your favorite show to work on?
Oh gosh.
And it could be one of the 2 that we've spent a while talking about. I don't mean to exclude them, but I am willing to widen the pool a little bit on this one.
Yeah. I mean, Bear and Pocoyo are 2 of my very favorites. It would be hard to sort of, it's like trying to choose a favorite child. You know what I mean?
Yes.
There are definitely shows. There are definitely shows I've worked on that I've been like, whatever. I also was very proud of Mama Mirabelle, which was a PBS show, and I've enjoyed working on. I worked a few years ago, just 2018, I guess, in 2017, on a show called Hello World, which was a show for the Discovery Channel that was nature docs like wildlife docs
Oh yeah.
that were narrated by pop stars, Christina Aguilera, Dave Matthews,
Cool.
yeah, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of, we only did, I think it was like a limited summer series, but I wrote all of them and was, a producer. And yeah. I was proud of that show. That was a really fun thing to work on because I got to go all around the country and over the UK and various places to record these people. Steven Tyler, Joan Jett, you know. So that was fun.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, it was cool. Yeah, but I think I'm very proud of the work that I did on Bear. I'm very proud of the work I did on Pocoyo. Those are two real sort of highlights, obviously.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, I've really enjoyed doing what I did.
Well, that's so incredible and so fortunate. I mean, what a blessing to be able to say that. But
Yeah, yeah.
those are all you've shared so many incredible stories and experiences. So, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Cartoon Creators. We would love if you connected with us on one of our social media channels. Have a comment, question, or an idea for a guest we should bring on to the pod? Email us at info@cartooncreators.com. Both words starting with a K, of course.